sister's a therapist and I tell jokes. We both want to help all kinds of folks.
Hello, and welcome to My Sister's a Therapist. My name's Virginia Jones. I'm a stand-up comedian who lives in Portland, Oregon, but my sister's a therapist.
Hello, I'm Laura Ryan. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist, but my main credit is sister to the lioness of laughter, Virginia Jones.
No comment. Laura, on this show, we take turns researching a topic that we're interested in and then springing it on the other person who gets to be surprised and hopefully interested in the topic at hand. This week, it's your turn. What would you like to talk about?
Well, Virginia, this week you get to be the potted plant because I am the knower of all things. This week's episode is a listener idea, so I'm going to read the listener's email. And also, if you are a listener and you would like your idea on the show, just email us at hello@mysistersatherapist.com. So this is an email from Anna. Hello, ladies. I want to suggest a topic that I think you'd absolutely crush. The current social media conversations about white womanhood. There's been a lot of commentary flying around, everything from this is peak white woman to observations about how middle-aged women, especially white middle-class women, are often pathologized or infantilized in public discourse. I think this could make for such a rich conversation about race, gender, mental health, privilege, and even how people perform trauma or innocence depending on context. Maybe even discuss broader dynamics like entitlement and performative victimhood. So Virginia, as a white middle-aged lady, how do you feel about this dynamic?
I think it's really interesting. Obviously, I carry, I think, a standard amount of white guilt, like a regular.
Like a standard amount of what?
Buckshot.
I think we all have a standard amount of buckshot. We grew up in the state of Texas.
I appreciate the dialogue. I appreciate being forced into a different perspective. I sit before you today and say that if your feminism is not intersectional feminism, it's
not feminism.
But my friend Amy Miller, a very funny comic, just wrote about this on Threads and said, something I learned this week is you cannot anger our fellow white women who spend all day on Threads. They're unwell, unfunny, and they've got nothing but time.
Woof.
The thing about being trolled by my fellow unhinged white women is that they're usually so unoriginal and unfunny, it gives me a nice little sense of job security. If you call me fat or Timu somebody, usually Timu Amy Schumer, now I know you've never said a funny or unique thing in your life. And your hat is ugly. She is experiencing
a lot of Karening
and a lot of judgment. You can feel in social media, you just can't win with anybody. Your beliefs and attitudes are either way too liberal or insensitive and not liberal enough. No one's opinion can possibly be correct because someone else is always going to be in conflict with it. White women really own that entitlement part.
Right. And I think the problem for me as a white woman is sometimes I'll want to make a funny joke. And then I think, but I'm a white woman, so it's going to be more offensive or it's going to be read differently. I was watching a TikTok today. It was a spoof on a women's podcast, but it was 3 gay guys dressed up as women. And it was really funny, but they all had facial hair. And so I was going to do a joke about, hey guys, a little wax on the upper lip can do wonders. But then I thought, no, someone's going to be offended by that.
Right. Someone's going to say, how dare you? Women can have mustaches. Women can have beards. Yes, that's true. My friend Jackie Cation, who is now and has always been for the working person, pro-intersectional feminism, pro-minority, has been called a Karen many times just because she's a middle-aged white woman.
Back in the day, being a middle-aged white woman wasn't a crime, but these days it certainly does feel that way.
It absolutely is. I've got a bit called The Backlash Against Karen Memes is Peak White Feminism by Stephanie Younger. Karen is a term that is aimed towards entitled and demanding white women. One of the most common Karen stereotypes is that of a white middle-aged woman, typically American, who has a bob cut, Laura, and a poor attitude towards customer service workers. Such women are depicted as demanding to, quote, speak to the manager. This is from Wikipedia's definition of the Karen meme. While white women have the privilege of simply being called a, quote, Karen, unquote, for enforcing oppression against marginalized people, Black women and girls are dismissed as angry, aggressive, and confrontational when we speak up about the injustices that we experience. Jackie, I know personally, tries to use her Karening for good. She tries to use her power to stand up for other people, to defend them. But I know many white women are defending their position as the next to most dominant species in our society.
The white supremacist patriarchal pecking order, white women are under white men. I think a lot of times white women will get a little uppity, as they say, and think, I deserve special treatment. I was thinking there's a lot of commonality in Karens and narcissism because they meet a lot of those same criteria. They believe that they should receive special treatment just simply because they are older white women.
I think a lot of the agita and the internal struggle of the Karen is maybe you were an eating disordered blonde woman who got a lot of attention 15, 20 years ago. And now you don't occupy the same space. You don't have the same visibility. So you have to agitate for that visibility.
You have to fight for special treatment.
That's what I see a lot of the, I want to speak to your manager as being.
I also think that white women have had a fall from grace. I think we used to be able to sort of rule the roost and people did defer to us. If you think about women of my mother's generation or even her mother's generation, when I talk to older Black people, I notice the way they talk to me is very different from younger Black people
Who see you as an equal.
Probably even less than. I mean, I'm
Right.
old.
Right.
I went to a school field trip recently and these kids of every race treated me like and I thought, my God, I would never have had the gall to speak to an adult like this at 11 years old, but it's a different time.
It's a different time. And as much as youth was fetishized in the 60s and 70s and 80s, now it is ultimate. Just being older than 20 is pretty much dead. This is my least favorite comment on TikTok when people find out how very, very old I am. Oh my God, way to go. I didn't know you were that old.
My least favorite comment in the halls of my home is, yeah, boomer. Brother, I am not a boomer.
Your grandfather was a boomer and he's dead.
Exactly. What exactly is a Karen and where did it come from? Says Ashitha Nagar. Karen has in recent years become a widespread meme referencing a certain type of middle-class white woman who exhibits behaviors that stem from privilege. The Karen stereotype is that they weaponize their relative privilege against people of color. British feminist Julie Bindel tweeted, "Does anyone else think the Karen slur is woman-hating and based on class prejudice?" End quote. A Black birder named Christian Cooper was walking in Central Park, New York, when he ran into a woman called Amy Cooper, no relation, who had let her dog off the lead in a leash-only area of the park. He asked her to put her dog back on the lead. Her response was to call 911 and in histrionic tones tell operators that, quote, "There's an African-American man threatening my life," end quote. The entire exchange was filmed, uploaded to social media, and Ms. Cooper was from then on known as Central Park Karen.
Chris Cooper has made a career out of this moment. And well, he should. I believe he got a show. We can't just optimistically say there's no crappy white women and that white women have not historically behaved in a very questionable way.
Reference Emmett Till.
Yeah. White women freaking out over people having a family barbecue. White women trying to express their dominance that they feel is slipping away. The hard truth is my age, my race gives me no rights over anybody else ever. But I guess when you've grown up with that privilege, it's hard to feel like you're losing it.
Our mother didn't go to an integrated school. Her mother was not racist at all until Black people started having their own rights and she couldn't pay someone 25 cents an hour to clean her house anymore. Our grandmother moved to peak racism when she discovered that Black women were being hired for the same job that she had.
When you think of a segment of people as being inherently inferior to you, you're still being racist. It's just not hateful.
You're not being overtly racist. She was
Right.
being covertly racist. But by the time we got to her, I mean, my God.
She was out of the gate talking about what they were up to, what they were talking about. I'm like, who's they, Grandma? And this is the grandmother that I am named after. So thanks a lot, Mom.
What a privilege to be named after such a wonderful woman.
This is where it starts to get uncomfortable for me. Is Barbie peak white feminism? Does it even matter? By JOURDAIN SEARLES. However, it is true that Gerwig's work is dominated by white characters, vocalizing the concerns of women who are already seen as the default. Even Barbie herself is the default. She refers to herself multiple times in the film as stereotypical Barbie. If that is the case, how could she know the nuances of being any other kind of Barbie? Robbie plays the character as often apologetic for the things she doesn't know, because up until now, everything was easy for her. This isn't just a story of Barbie finding herself. It's about her seeing the world as it really is for the first time. And who would be more in need of a reality check than a thin, blonde, white woman? When Barbie encounters America Ferrera's daughter and just goes in assuming she's going to like Barbie because everyone likes Barbie. And she's like, I'm pretty, I'm cool. People like me. Being confronted with a child who does not like her and has no use for her. It's very hard on Barbie. She's just not used to this response. I think we all experience that in some ways as society moves and changes. I don't have inherent value just being a white woman.
And I used to think, oh, yeah, I'm not like those other white women. I'm a cool white woman. But on the field trip, when this young white woman was openly rolling her eyes at me for telling her to stay with the group, I was like, come on, man, I'm cool.
I'm one of the good ones. That's the thing. Everybody thinks they're one of the good ones.
I really thought I was. I thought I was special. I had a savior complex. I remember as a child crying over Ethiopian children and having this white savior crap going on. And I really thought I was something.
I understand that Greta Gerwig's work is dominated by white female characters. And I do think representation is very, very important in Hollywood. Also, when you're telling your own story, I understand why it's compelling to make that person look like you.
If you look at the Barbie franchise, it's always been white dominated. It's made by a white woman in the 60s.
But she did get a black friend eventually.
And I remember when I was a young woman living in San Antonio and I wanted this particular white Barbie and I ended up getting the Hispanic one because all the white ones were sold out. I was disappointed. I wanted to see my face reflected back at me because I'd grown so used to it. So we're going to talk about white women's tears. When white women cry, how white women's tears oppress women of color by Mamta, Motwani, Accapadi. While white women are members of an oppressed group based on gender, they still experience privilege based on race. This dual oppressor-oppressed identity often becomes the root of tension when white women are challenged to consider their white privilege by women of color. While white women have been depicted to be the foundation of purity, chastity, and virtue, women of color have historically been characterized by the negative stereotypes and the historical lower status position associated with the racial communities in American society. I was listening to a Shakespeare scholar today talk about women's portrayal in Shakespeare. And she was saying Shakespeare was one of the few playwrights of his time or her time, depending on who you think Shakespeare is, to develop characters that were fully realized women. The Victorian people took Shakespeare and made Shakespeare about white women. This idea of white women as pitiful and sick and strange and needing help and crying all the time. When I was a child, especially, but even as an adult, when I'm crying, people listen, people notice. Oh gosh, we have to cater to that white woman crying over there. I don't know that I've ever found myself using it as a weapon. I probably have. I definitely have when it comes to the police, but I've never confronted the fact that I get preferential treatment until the last 15 years or so.
I definitely have used crying as a weapon, but mostly in relationships. When I'm feeling overwhelmed or I'm confused or dysregulated, my first thing to do is to cry, which tends to shut everybody up. We were just talking about the Victorian ideal of women as weak and preferably with tuberculosis.
TB is always a plus.
In our beauty myth episode, one of the first things that I really liked about Shakespeare was that the women were not all totally good or totally evil, or we're not just there to be sexual objects, or we're not just there as a bawdy joke. They're multidimensional. Lady Macbeth is not the same as the Wicked Witch. She had problems. She had solutions. Most of those solutions were bloody. Ophelia probably is the crummiest. She's just running after a man and being sad and then throwing herself into the water.
This is what I was listening to the analysis of today. And basically, it was really interesting. They were saying, get thee to a nunnery is apparently a horrible thing to say to a person.
You're a whore.
Yeah.
You should go to a house with the whores.
Right. They were saying that she probably did have sex with Hamlet.
That is the intimation.
That means that she's forced to marry Hamlet. She was saying, we're not sure if she wanted to have sex with Hamlet or if she was forced to have sex with Hamlet. But we do know that now that she has done it, that's why she's so upset. I thought it was just because she was so besotted and in love with him.
Her boyfriend's rejecting her and it's sad.
Right. But really, it was because now she's been deflowered and she's forced to marry this person who seems very mentally ill. They were also saying, we're not even sure that she chose to kill herself. Mm-hmm. That may have been someone else's decision as well, because you're going to be just out in them streets and we can't have that. So,
well, and her father's been stabbed through a curtain
by her betrothed.
It wasn't an easy time for Ophelia.
Guys, let's practice having a little more sympathy for Ophelia.
And Medusa.
I have lots of sympathy for Medusa.
Additionally, as Palmer states, the problem for white women is that their privilege is based on accepting the image of goodness, which is powerlessness. This powerlessness informs the nature of white womanhood. Put in simple terms, male privilege positions the nature of womanhood, while white privilege, through history, positions a white woman's reality as the universal norm of womanhood, leaving a woman of color defined by two layers of oppression. Our societal norms inform us that crying indicates helplessness, which triggers an automatic sympathy for the white woman. The white woman's reality is visible, acknowledged, and legitimized because of her tears, while a woman of color's reality, like her struggle, is invisible, overlooked, and pathologized as based on the operating, quote, standard of humanity. In Streetcar Named Desire, I have always depended on the kindness of strangers. This idea of a white woman in a terrible situation, but knows that she can go out and get the empathy of strangers and get people to help her just based on her whiteness and her powerlessness.
I recently watched Little Shop of Horrors. I just noticed that Audrey spends the whole movie dressing pretty inappropriately for the workplace and also crying. She doesn't feel like she can do anything. And every man is in there trying to make everything okay for her.
Except for the evil dentist. She's a woman in the 60s. What kind of autonomy does she have? She needs to marry into safety. She's just trying to do that. She's just out there, bust out, trying to make it happen.
Where the guys are drips. The challenge and responsibility of any person who has one up, one down identity with one identity that is privileged and another that is oppressed is to recognize when their privileged identity is the operating norm. White women have one up, one down identities, and as white women must recognize the power that comes with whiteness. Recognizing privilege means acknowledging that our societal norms allow white women to toggle their identities, meaning that they can choose to be a woman and they can choose to be white.
Let's talk a little more about the helpless white woman trope and the relevance in society. One of the most racist dichotomies in media is the missing white woman syndrome, where if a white girl is kidnapped or missing, it will be headline news. There will be 24-hour coverage, and a woman of the same age who's a woman of color, it's not news. It's not interesting.
There's the scourge of Native American women being kidnapped and probably being trafficked, but nobody cares nor notices. That's something I notice a lot on TikTok is people trying to boost information about Black women who have been kidnapped or Black girls even because the media isn't covering it because it's not considered important news if it's not some sad white lady.
In local news, if anyone is kidnapped, you're going to hear about it. But in national news, if it's not picked up, it's invisible. And it's the No Kings March today in real time. I was talking with my partner about the frustration we have because the last No Kings March was massive. It was said to be the biggest demonstration of any kind worldwide, but it got very little press coverage because it's not the story that the dominant political party wants to be heard. And it's incredibly frustrating to feel that no matter what you do, no matter what action you take, because it's not being broadcast, it's kind of useless.
And if you're a Black woman who's been trafficked, every second counts. You can't find people if you don't know that they're lost. I also feel this way about Epstein. The reason why everyone cares so much about the Epstein situation, those were well-to-do white girls who were being trafficked.
Well, not all of them, but the fact that there were white girls involved.
There were lots of white girls from privileged families who were being taken into this scenario. And I think that that's why America still cares about it.
The damsel in distress trope of a helpless white woman, it's very attractive, and women have been made to dress and comport themselves as helpless, wearing high heels and tight skirts and corsets and other things that are going to impede our ability to escape to safety. But it also feeds into this really negative message that women need rescue and need help and need to just wait around for the right guy. And that hurts everybody, not just white women.
If we look back at that idea of the social identity of being a white person, as a white woman, I do get more attention from people in helping positions. It's been 12 years and it's time to get another driver's license photo.
I'm really sorry about that.
It's going to be rough because the last time I was 12 years younger. Plus, I was fully pregnant. So my face was really thinned out and I had this kind of glow and tons of hair. And now I'm just going to be a bald old
looking
Oh, good. When I walked into the DPS, apparently 12 years on, you have to have an appointment. You can't just walk in and wait. I walk in and I'm like, well, maybe I could force their hand.
Wink, wink.
Nudge, nudge, say no more. They didn't fall for it, but I saw a lot of people standing around waiting for help, and I immediately got helped. She walked over to the laptop and walked me through the whole process. And she said, I'm going to talk to this guy and see if he can squeeze you in. And they did. So I'm going to get a quick turnaround on my driver's license because I'm an old white lady. I also had makeup on, so I was using my pretty privilege.
Combining these two social identities, white women can be both helpless without the helplessness being a reflection of all white people, and powerful by occupying a position of power as any white person. In difficult conversations, remember the goal of the conversation. White privilege allows you to shift the conversation about you and your feelings away from the original goal of the conversation.
Let's talk about what that means. White privilege allows you to shift the conversation about you and your feelings away from the original goal of the conversation. For example, maybe I walked into the DPS and pushed aside 3 women of color physically. And then when they said, hey, that wasn't great, I start crying. And when I start crying, that means that the conversation goes away from my terrible behavior and moves to my victimhood. Instead of blanketing assumption observations, be specific about your observations. Rather than you are angry, be specific about the observation. I noticed that when I pushed you aside, you were impacted in this manner. Be clear on not only naming emotions, but the root or cause of the emotions, because I think that's the thing they're talking about. It's not just what I did, but the fact that I caused harm.
When you think of protecting white privilege, it helps me understand what motivates terrible conservative women. They know they're on the backside because they're women,
right?
But they need to cozy up to the dominant party of white men to maintain the privilege that they do have.
Right. I may have scraps of privilege, but at least I have some, so I need to hang on to those. We often do not hold ourselves accountable for our actions within our privileged spaces, which leads us to the underlying assumptions that things just mysteriously happen.
It just happened that way.
I was at the back of the line and somehow I just ended up at the very front and people were handing me $50 bills. That happens to me every day.
There's something called the Matthew effect, that people who have initial advantages get more advantages over time. If you are in a room of 30 people and one person is a little more famous or moneyed or successful, people will tend to divert their attentions, resources towards that person. And so that's why the rich get richer and the poor get the picture. So if you have always had white privilege, if you've always kind of defaulted to being an authority figure or a figure of sympathy, someone who things just happen to work out for, it may be because of this idea. Once you have occupied a higher status position, money, attention, reciprocation, opportunities will flow towards you.
Absolutely. I was at a bakery and I was waiting my turn and I was not the first person in line, but the white man who was behind the counter offered to give me his services first when there were 2 or 3 Black and Hispanic women nearby. And that wasn't great.
No, that can't feel great. Privilege is not just about our social identity. Which behaviors do you privilege? Crying, lower tone of voice, direct eye contact. And which behaviors do you punish? Anger, raised voices, indirect eye contact. Recognize how certain preferred behaviors are associated with whiteness, while problem or questionable behaviors are associated with different communities of color. Learn to recognize when you are in a position to be an ally. White people should also actively talk about white racism in safe, separate spaces to challenge themselves, their peers, and or their staffs. This process should be rooted in empowerment and not guilt. The empowerment of humanity, the empowerment of what exactly? Because we are sacrificing our own empowerment and our own privilege to make a more egalitarian society.
I feel more empowered when I'm making choices that are based on reality rather than this undeserved privilege that I'm ending up with.
I will say, especially in Portland, and I welcome it, and it's the correct thing, but my straight privilege is really going down the toilet.
Tell me more about that.
I had my time in the sun. Very nice comics will ask me, do you consider yourself queer? And I have to say no. Well, I've got a spot for a queer comic on the show.
I see. Okay. I thought you meant like getting a table in a restaurant.
No, I've never gotten a table in a restaurant for being straight. But in comedy, in writing, in these kinds of opportunities, that privilege has passed on because we are accepting that other voices are just as valid, if not more valid, in this space.
Right, exactly. So we're going to talk about when white women get caught, victimhood as racialized violence. An important aside, I often notice white people retweeting me as a way to shift responsibility. This is just another strategy to avoid accountability. They are micro-performing the same macro performances that white cultural and academic institutions do, performative allyship. White people have constant access and can weaponize it whenever they feel like. I want you to imagine racism as free-floating levers that orbit our metaphysical space. White men constantly hold on to their levers with a firm and tight grasp, violently yanking on it to display their power. White women pretend that they do not have access to levers, that they are always somehow just out of reach. Black and women of color know white women well. We see how they sneakily dance their hands around it, flirting with it and threatening us with the pull. How many levers are you pulling, Virginia?
I do think it's important to really question your own motivations in the split-second decisions you're making. When I have opportunities in comedy, I really try to pull women of color first because, unfortunately, I will be occupying the white lady spot. At work, I really try to promote equal consideration of women of color, especially for positions that are open at my company, because I truly believe that DEI is a benefit for businesses and is not a negative, because America is many colors. Our customers are many colors. And if you just have white people trying to figure out what Hispanic people, say in San Antonio, want, there's not going to be any Hispanic Barbie dolls. They're all going to be white.
Or they're going to be ethnic slurs, or they're going to be racially charged. It's not the move. That to me is what I find fascinating in general about commercials and marketing. Talk to somebody besides old white guys when y'all are making these ads. This doesn't make any sense.
I've been watching old videos of 120 minutes recently. On YouTube, frequently the advertising has not been cut out. And advertising in the 90s is so embarrassing. Every ad, every product is being promoted by a white person rapping. It's unending. A white person using AAVE rapping or the sound of a record scratching. It's unending white entitlement, white co-opting, and white privilege. It does make me feel good to see, like, at least I can recognize it now and say we have made some amount of progress as a country. But that's what happens when you have all white voices in the room.
And when I don't see my lever, I didn't know I had levers back then. I just thought, oh, this is just marketing and advertising. This is
This is what it looks like.
Now, even in the year of our Lord 2025, some people may have seen some of my AI TikToks, which everybody loves. I joined Sora, and right now it's a pretty small group of people because it's invite only, but I noticed most of the content is for thin white people. There's a lot of really offensive videos about fat people, and usually they're people of color. This is what we're designing on the computer. We didn't cast anybody. I just decided with the tippy tappy of my fingers that I'm going to make this fat person some other ethnic minority and make fun of them. It's a bunch of white teenage boys that are making most of these Soras, I believe. Because to make a Sora, you have to type out word for word everything that's happening in the scene. You had to say, this is a black fat person in a wheelchair for the scene to be that way.
But even before that, one of the big disadvantages of AI has been AI is just scraping everything that's gone before. AI is reflecting us back to ourselves.
Review our Death by Chatbot episode.
Right. When you ask AI to write a story and say, who's the bad guy? Well, the bad guy is going to be a person of color. When you ask AI, who's the heroine? She's going to be a thin white woman because AI can see everything we've done before. We are going to get trapped in a cycle
of copy pasting our own racism and white supremacy
and just amplifying it.
Right, exactly.
It is a, quote, sisterhood, unquote, that replicates the racial hierarchy between white and bodies of color. It is a, quote, sisterhood, unquote, that upholds white supremacy, which white women are invested in. It is a sisterhood that is for white membership only. Since I and many other Black and women of color challenged her visioning of this sisterhood by speaking, she had to put us back in our places. This would explain her racializing us as bullies and attackers, and more personally, tweeting me to shut up.
White women don't like to be challenged. Newsflash.
No, white women don't like to be challenged because white women have not been challenged. We are not used to it as a people, especially when we're talking to other women. We have an assumed position in the hierarchy, and the only defense is abuse.
Or crying. In therapist spaces, it's mostly white women. But in the last few years, I've been doing this NET training, there's a multiverse of different groups in the room. I found myself wanting to raise my hand every 10 seconds because that's my role in classrooms. But I discovered my opinion actually isn't more important or more interesting than anyone else's. Maybe I need to STFU and keep my ass in the seat and not worry about it.
When I went to college, the first college I went to was a women's college, and I got a lot out of it, even though I was only there a year. Thanks a lot, Dad. It was really interesting and valuable because the lesson I learned there was when there are no men in the room, the women speak up. When you look around and who's the leader, and all you see is other women, you're like, oh, maybe it's me.
So when the white women shut up, that means everyone else can too.
When you're making spaces for discussion, you have to leave space for women of color and other individuals to speak up. That's what sisterhood really is.
Yeah, I agree with that. Have you read the book White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo?
I haven't, but I've seen a lot of it quoted on TikTok. Does that count?
Close enough. I read this book in graduate school and I found it very enlightening. I appreciated that it was written by a white woman who understands my experience. She's fallen under a lot of backlash in recent years because people are saying, yeah, you have no business talking about something that you benefit from. So we're going to quote from the article, "What's so bad about Robin DiAngelo? White fragility does not demand that white people participate in a political movement that will readjust the balance of wealth and power in this country. This means that rather than fighting the racial status quo, it ends up supporting it by encouraging changing hearts and minds that will make the country feel less racist without actually addressing the worst existing racial disparities in who owns or controls what." So what do you make of that?
I'm trying my best.
Tell me more about what that means. In what way are you trying your best?
I have to accept this as a valid criticism, but also if I feel motivated to write about my own fragility and my demonstration of helplessness and how it hurts the world and how we need to reconsider it, I'm challenged by the criticism that you shouldn't speak about this at all because you benefit from it.
I think what they're saying is Robin DiAngelo is speaking as a white woman. She's getting up on this platform. She teaches all these trainings to IBM and Amazon, all these different companies. But all she talks about is working on myself. She doesn't talk about helping in a more global way to actually make this world equitable for everybody.
I see. There is actually a good reason to discuss, quote, white people, unquote, as a group, because the moment you say, well, of course, there's some exceptions, everyone thinks they're the exception. Everyone thinks they're one of the good ones, right? The generalization is meant to force every white person to examine themselves. And it's, again, something that Martin Luther King himself did.
Martin Luther King said, whites, it must frankly be said, are not putting on a similar mass effort to re-educate themselves out of their racial ignorance. It is an aspect of their sense of superiority that the white people of America believe that they have so little to learn.
Absolutely. And I don't think we were ready to hear that in the 60s. I personally am ready to hear it now.
Mic drop, MLK. Let's do this.
Only 75 years later, I'm ready to do it.
It's a probably 3-pronged or maybe 12-pronged situation. I do think a big component of it is addressing this inherent belief that I am superior to other groups or that I deserve preferential treatment. I guess we would call it white narcissism. White women thinking that they should be at the head of the line or first in class and just working with that as their assumption. We need to address that. And also, we need to address redlining and gerrymandering and all the things that we have done to create situations where Black people and people of color cannot get ahead.
And to minimize Black voices because they make us uncomfortable.
And ICE raids.
Oh, I don't know. I think ICE raids, I think there's great people on both sides.
You know, there's good people all around. I think we're all just trying to find our way through these ICE raids.
It's really challenging, but really valuable to ask yourself, why do I feel like I get listened to? When you've always been towards the front of the line, you think that you inherently deserve that. We've talked about this in a lot of different ways. If you've always experienced pretty privilege, then that feels very natural to you. And I think it's a really good exercise to try to examine, what do any of us deserve? Not much. If we're looking for equality, none of us deserve to be put at the head of the line.
Or all of us deserve to be put at the head of the line. It's a really long, complicated line. I think we have a lot to learn from trans men. I heard a trans man speaking recently, and he was saying, I think I understand the man cold situation. They were saying I haven't had a period in 3 years now. It feels like this is just my normal body. And I don't have that monthly experience of everything being completely dysregulated and being in exhaustive pain and feeling like I'm going to die for a week. Men haven't experienced this. For them, it's very jarring, but
to not feel well.
Right. And so I think it's just stuff like that. I think that in my little silo over here as a privileged white lady, I didn't have access to any people of color really until I was probably 15 years old. I remember there was one Asian girl and one Black girl at my K through 6 school. That's insane. I learned a lot of crap because I was living in this quote unquote privileged position, and it was just sort of assumed. That's how we learned that the world worked.
One of my first jobs out of college, I worked in a laboratory, and there was a Black girl who worked there with me. And when the conversation turned to concerns about people of color, like what kind of music, what kind of movies, she one time told me, it's exhausting having to represent for a whole race. I can't take all of this on. I can only speak to me. And it was weird because I just assumed that she was the expert on all things Black culture because she was the Black woman that I knew.
Right. Because we think of people as monoliths. I remember moving to Europe for the first, this is going to sound very white. I moved to Europe for the first time. And it was when George Bush had been elected and everyone was up in arms about it because they thought that was a big deal.
Oh, what sweet summer children we were. What innocent little babies.
I know. We never knew how bad it could really get. But I remember having to represent America every time I entered a conversation. And it was exhausting. And I had that thought. I was like, oh my God, this is what it's like to be a person of color every day that ends in Y. And this sucks.
Yeah. The author of White Fragility, D'Angelo encourages white progressives to, quote, look inward, unquote, but inward is precisely where they already look too much. Instead, they need to look outward, study the literature, history, and politics of groups different from themselves. Start caring about the ways the healthcare system, immigration system, and education system disadvantage people who are not white. And instead of just committing yourself to learning and growing in your interpersonal life, commit yourself to lending your support to those who are trying to change the situation. I totally agree with this, but I also think that looking inward is the first step to recognize the privilege that we've benefited from and the privilege that we need to relinquish. I think that's the first step to being able to reach out and help lift other people up.
I have a lot of sympathy for the men in my life who I asked constantly to unpack their privilege and really understand you're in a position because of the society that you grew up in. There's nothing special about you. You don't have special powers. And I want you to explore and investigate the ways that you benefit from these oppressive systems that hurt women. I can't really ask men to do that and then not be willing to do it myself.
This week, I had the extremely aggravating experience of receiving a fan email. And I don't think he really was a fan, but it was someone.
Why is it aggravating? You don't like fan emails? I do. Well, you can write me at hello@mysistersatherapist.com.
I'm using fan very loosely. This is someone who had seen my act, and I share my social media information after my set in case anybody wants to be my fan and follow my career. He wrote me in the middle of the night and said, I enjoyed your act, but I just really am disheartened by how straight white men have become okay to punch down, how prevalent it is to bash on straight white men and how accepted. You can just criticize us and nobody cares. And I said, man, please depersonalize this from being about you and see that it's about patriarchy. Why are you making this about yourself?
Well, and also I'm allowed to punch at you if you're doing crappy stuff.
And I'm allowed to punch at you even if you're not. I'm allowed to punch at you for any reason that I see fit.
But not me.
But I'm one of the good ones. I enjoyed your comedy. I said I did. And I said, man, please examine your own privilege that led you to write this email in the first place. I am trying to imagine a scenario in which you went to go see a male comic and had a bone to pick about something or another that they said and felt that you should drop them a note. I can't imagine it. You can't even move aside your own privilege to see your privilege, dude.
Because I'm lost in the sauce of the patriarchy. Because I've been in it my whole life.
This makes me feel bad.
Whenever I start to feel like I'm chill, I'm good, I just watch South Africans talk about life. And I think, oh, we're just doing that, but we're doing it quietly. I remember Trevor Noah saying, we're doing the exact same things in America as they did in South Africa. But he said, I actually prefer the South African method because it's overt and it's honest. And here you're just lying and winking and nudging and whatnot the whole time. Thank you again, Anna, for this very interesting topic. I hope we did it justice. I hope we answered all of your questions. Virginia, what are your final thoughts on this topic?
My final thoughts are this is a painful topic to talk about because everybody wants to feel like we're at the end of our learning. We're the product of all the work that we've done. And I still have challenges. I still have blind spots. I appreciate the opportunity to review them. I think it's hard for any person who has experienced any slight advantage in life's pecking order to question that and say, what did I do to deserve this? Another great lesson that I've had, and I've talked about this before, when you talk about trans men's experience of the male cold, I've learned a ton from trans women in comedy because the women that I have known petition for themselves and they ask for things. They champion themselves. When I first interacted with this, I remember thinking, well, that's not ladylike. And why should it be? Why am I just sitting on the sidelines going, I'll just sit here until somebody picks me? That's the ladylike thing to do. Screw that. I want to be less ladylike. I want to be less of a damsel in distress. And I want to learn from people around me. Laura, what are your final thoughts?
I really appreciate this topic being brought to the fore. It's something I think about a lot. It has been a really tough experience for me to unpack all of my bias and all of my privilege and all these things over the last several years. And it's not for the faint-hearted. It's really hard work to do. And it is also really hard work when you realize so much of the systems in place were not built for women, period, but especially not for women of color or people who are not able-bodied, white, wealthy people. I saw a TikTok the other day where they were looking at the economy, and the economy is a K now because 20% of the population has all of the money going up, and then 80% have the bottom part of the K with all the money going down. Isn't that
Nice.
wonderful? I love that. This world is built for certain people. And when you're not in that group, life sucks a lot more. I was recently watching the new Superman movie. I was ashamed by how much white savior complex Superman has.
Alien savior complex.
Well, okay, but he's living as a privileged white man in America. He's watching TV and there's a little brown child covered in dirt and crying in a war-torn place, and Superman just has to run over there and help him. And I just thought, God, this is disgusting. And I can't believe I never noticed before, but that's my privilege. Part of being privileged is having blinders to all these things and just thinking, well, this is just the way things are.
This is just normal.
Right. It's been a challenging task, but I'm always up for the challenge, trying to do better. I think the book, The History of White People, is really good because it shows you how much all of this stuff is just a construct. Virginia, if anyone wants to stop crying about their white privilege and stop feeling like a piece of garbage, maybe listening to some funny, probably sexist comedy, how would they go about doing that?
Misinterest comedy, please. You can find me at my website, which is Badinia, BADINIA.com, and on my TikTok, which is also Badinia, and my Instagram, that is also Badinia. If you would like to check out our podcast, you can find us at mysistersatherapist.com. You can find us on Instagram at My Sister's a Therapist, and you can find us on Laura's TikTok. I am Laura Ryan. You bring up an interesting point that I've been thinking about the K. When this administration started and our president started destroying social protections and welfare programs, I was thinking, why does he want to do this? Why does it benefit him for the majority of the country to be just teetering on the precipice of destruction? Why does it benefit him for so many people in red states to be hungry and to be sick? And I realized it's because when you have any sort of independence, you get something called FU money, where you don't have to take crap from anybody. But if you have no money, you'll take anything from anyone. That's where he wants to put us. And that's brought me a lot of clarity.
Oppression works.
Yeah, he wants to have an oppressed populace that he can take additional advantage of. That at least makes sense to me. Why do you want to make people miserable when you are voted into office and these people will know that you've made them miserable, that you have actively worked for their destruction? Because you want them to be so hungry and so tired and so desperate that they'll cling on to anything that they're given. Thumbs up. And on that thought, Laura, I know that people sometimes write us reviews or emails, and we would love for you to write us a review. You can do it on Spotify. You can do it on Apple Podcasts. You can do it on Audible. Laura, do you have a review to share this week?
I certainly do. This is from Go Lilith, and it was a review on Apple Podcast. Shout out to the Lilith Fair. Whoop, whoop. It's a 5-star review, which is my favorite kind on Apple Podcasts. And it says, love this pod. Fantastic podcast, entertaining, educational, and the sister vibe is strong. Thanks, Lilith.
That's awesome.
Also, if you're interested in giving us money, you can email us at hireus@mysistersatherapist.com. Shout out to G Sauce. Shout out to Imperfect Foods. Shout out to Liquid Death. Shout out to Costco.
Shout out to Truvani vegan protein supplement. I'm really enjoying that.
Okay. All right. I'll take it.
Speaking of sisterhood, I want to close the show as we always do
The traveling pants.
with the words of our spiritual founder, Billy Ray Valentine Capricorn, as he said, we could make it, baby.
Me and you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.